Hello and welcome to the Hook Island Monster Mystery. Today we have a cryptid that should be, by all appearances, part of the Cryptid Spotlight series. Yet, I can't include it since I have to approach this very differently. Normally with this series, I like to illuminate only the story behind each creature, all the while leaving very little input from my own thoughts on the subject matter. With this aquatic beast, the story is fascinating, but is often marred by it simply being relegated to the hoax category. Many times this is done with little to no proof backing that decision. So with this video, I want to look into the story and investigate the claims behind it being said to be a hoax. Before starting, I would like to thank both Robin Nunya and Luke Klein for suggesting this topic. A part of me feels like someone else requested this also, but I can't find that note. So, as always, if I missed your name, let me know in the comment section below. Without further ado, let's look at this equally strange cryptid and encounter. Our story begins in December 12th, 1964, on the mostly uninhabited Hook Island that is located off the coast of Queensland, Australia. On this day, a Frenchman by the name of Robert Le Serec, along with his family, as well as his friend named Hank de Jong, were enjoying their planned 3-month vacation on the island. The group had recently purchased a motorboat and were out in the water in Stonehaven's Bay, which formed a lagoon. While on the water, Robert's wife noticed a weird-looking object resting on the shallow sea floor, and they all agreed that whatever it was at least 30 feet long. As they drew near, it became apparent that this object was some type of creature, and its shape was similar to that of a massive tadpole. The group took a few pictures of the beast from the safety of their boat, but Robert and Hank decided to enter the water to get a better look at the creature, since they assumed that it was actually dead. The pair drew near the beast, and they realized it was much larger than previously thought, and they managed to gather quite a few details that are often forgot about when others report on it. They stated it had a large head that was estimated to be 4 feet high from the top to bottom. Its jaws were about 4 feet wide, with the lower jaw being flat like that of a sandfish, and it had 2 eyes on the top of its head, which were said to have slits for pupils, and the eye color was a pale green, which could almost look white. The skin was completely smooth with no scales being seen, and as such they claimed it resembled shark skin. It was a dull, brownish black color, and it had a 1 foot wide brownish ring spaced 5 feet apart running down its back. The entire body was estimated to be 79 feet long, where at the head it was said to be as thick as over 2 feet, and gradually declined in thickness to which it ended in a whip-like tail. It was noted that there appeared to be some type of white wound on the body near the tail, which was assumed to have been caused by a propeller of a motorboat. It was surmised that this injury is what caused the creature to rest on the sea floor to begin with. Robert stated that neither of the men saw any fins or spines on the creature, nor could they find any breathing ports, but he assumed that they had just missed them. A detail that many reports forget is that Robert did state that he saw the mouth had many small white teeth and some type of black substance was hanging from the top row, which they assumed was the remains of a fish. Both men noticed that the flesh was a white color inside the creature's mouth. They became aware of these details when the monster apparently grew tired of their presence and suddenly opened its mouth wide and lurched its head towards the men. Now aware that this being wasn't actually dead, they took this threat seriously and scrambled to get back on board their ship. Within this moment of time, the creature swam back out to sea and wasn't seen again. Now, the story along with the pictures that were taken of the event wouldn't emerge again until the 1965 March issue of Everybody's Magazine. With this story and images being released to the public, it brought many interested people forward, namely famed biologist Ivan T. Sanderson and his colleague, a Belgian cryptozoologist named Bernard Vermeulen. According to Ivan, he first became aware of the story when Robert allegedly tried and failed to sell his story to U.S. media outlets in February of 1965. As such, Ivan claimed that after reviewing the evidence, he was confident that the only thing that the images showed was either a deflated skyhook balloon, a large plastic bag, or a roll of cloth. Bernard was also skeptical of the photos, but went a different route in trying to explain them. He looked into Robert's history and wrote about what he found in his 1968 book entitled The Wake of Sea Serpents. On page 534 of the book, he claimed that he heard reports that before leaving for his trip, Robert tried to get a group together for an expedition that would be financially fruitful. He also said that Robert mentioned that if that plan failed, then he, and I quote, had another thing in reserve which will bring in a lot of money. It's to do with sea serpents. End quote. Now this information is very troubling indeed, but I found a few things peculiar with it. Bernard Van Moos actually published his book entitled Le Grand Serpent de Mer, or The Great Sea Serpent, on January 1st, 1965, which as a side note was before Robert's article in the magazine, but after the alleged encounter. In its pages, it told of many encounters reported to the author about a tadpole-like sea serpent that was called Yellow Belly. From what I can gather, these stories are not considered fiction or the ruminations of the author, but are instead actual sightings, much like those of Bigfoot today. One story from the book occurred on September 11, 1876. Captain John K. Webster and a surgeon named James Anderson were on board a steamer called the Nestor. As the craft navigated the waters of the Strait of Malacca, which is off the coast of Malaysia, they saw a strange creature swimming around the boat. It did this for at least 30 minutes before it finally lost interest and swam away. What is interesting is that it was described as having a tadpole-like shape and didn't have any flippers. Its head was enormous and was directly attached to its 60 to 100 foot long body, which ended in a skinny tail. The skin was a yellow color and had distinct black lines running down its body. Then, on October 4th, 1885, reported sightings of a similar creature were seen off the coast of South Africa. Everything matched the previous description, except for the fact that there were claims that it did have flippers, and they would slap the water's surface when the beast rose up. In this book, Bernard stated that he thought these sightings were either an unknown shark species or some type of amphibian. Even when looking into his previous works, he showed great interest in the idea of sea serpents being a reality. So, knowing all of this information, I find it quite peculiar that one of the literal founding fathers of cryptozoology would so easily write off another person's sightings. First off, many people wonder who came first with the story about a tadpole type of creature. Well, by using the dates, Robert literally had his encounter not even a full month, mere weeks in fact, before Bernard published his book. Many simply go by these dates and easily give the quote-unquote win to Robert. Although it is important to remember that Bernard's book was published on January 1st, but we can be quite certain that he was actually writing it early on in the prior year, if not years. While this is interesting to think about, there aren't any records of him actually talking about or writing articles in relation to the topic before the book was finalized. Although I am sure it was quite well known that Bernard was actively involved in the studies of sea serpents. Yet, if history is any indicator, all depictions of sea serpents look very similar to one another, and in that, not looking very tadpole-like. So it still seems Robert has a win in this category. It seriously makes me wonder if this story somehow caused a bit of rivalry between the two men. Although you would think Robert's claims would actually help Bernard's book sales, since it essentially provided proof behind the tales written in the pages. Now as for the character claims, which paint Robert in a poor light and very much looking like a con man, there is something to keep in mind. All this information was provided by Bernard. I admittedly haven't personally read his book where he mentions those statements he gathered from people, but from all indications it appears that they were anonymous sources. I won't say he outright made up those claims, since I don't know that information, but without names and written statements, it really is a lot like hearsay. Especially coming from a man who wants to make money off of a book about sea serpents, and another man who wants to make money and claims to have actually seen and photographed one. Focusing on Ivan's statement of Robert failing to convince US media to publish his story, this really seems odd. This was the 1960s, where sensational stories were quite frequently the product of the writer's room. Actually, apparently not much has changed in that regards. It just switched from Little Green Men and is now only about politics. Where are the Bat Boy papers? But I digress. The only sticking point here is that it is possible that if true, Robert might have actually been requesting more money for the story than the news was willing to provide. Not only this, but I find it odd that Robert would wait to sell his story, if he was so money hungry, until 2 months after the encounter. Even as such, the pictures are still viewed as excellent evidence, hoax or not, and from what I have gathered, Robert didn't gain wealth or really much in the way of fame from the story. I also would like to point out that if Robert was actually that big of a con man, wouldn't he have had a bigger role in cryptid sightings throughout the years? You know, a person who would constantly be seeing/reporting strange beings, or better yet, encountering the same creature again. In all fairness, Ivan and Bernard did state that if the images were in fact real, that it could have been a type of misplaced swamp eel. Yet they also were convinced that the monster was actually a piece of plastic that was held down by sand. Proof of this is in the photos where they say you can see sand piled on top of the creature's tail. They also said that you can see sand around where the skin is touching the bottom. I am not sure this disproves those ideas, but Robert did say that the creature was partially grounded in the sand, and the white spot on the tail was the injury that they described. I won't go into the issue that some have brought up about the eye placement not being accurate, since, as others have pointed out, most cryptids don't follow the typical anatomy. I also love it when some claim that the images are photoshopped. I wasn't aware that Adobe was offering that service in 1965. The most common theory is that it is a group of fish, but oddly enough, that is the only explanation that is agreed to be false by both scientists and cryptozoologists. At the end of the day, it really does seem like you can go either way with this story, since neither side really provides enough information to debunk the other. I do really find it a shame that this whole encounter is put into the hoax category just for the sake of doing so, or by simply taking the word of a possible rival that some unknown people said something negative about Robert. I will end this on a funny note. The only way I can truly debunk this is, if you saw this thing under the water, would you be jumping in to check it out? Not me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really tried to piece as much of the story together as I could without excluding anything. Even though many claim it is a hoax, it still stands as some of the most fascinating photographs out there. As always, remember to keep voting for which state you would like to see next in the Cryptid by State series. Although, at this point, you are all doing a very fantastic job with that. For those who are curious, with last week's video, Delaware received enough votes to finally overtake Georgia's spot, but it only is leading by 1. As such, I have been eagerly watching this back and forth battle, and I'm really excited to see who ends up being the victor for August's video. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you share my videos with some you know who may enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.